Welcome to 8 Spotlight, a podcast from 8 Capital where we shine a light on the incredible companies and founders coming out of Y Combinator. Over the years, we've had the privilege of being a YC Demo Day fund. And in the process, we've built a portfolio of more than 200 companies, each with their own unique journey, lessons, and insights. This show is our chance to share those stories with you. Today, we're starting off strong with Noah Palansky, co-founder of Taiv. Taiv is transforming the way everyday TVs in bars, gyms, and convenience stores generate value for business owners, advertisers, and the people watching them. What started as a scrappy YC-backed idea has grown into a business with over 3,000 partners and a brand new Series A round led by IDC Ventures with significant participation from emerging ventures. In this conversation, we'll dig into Noah's path to becoming a founder, how Taiv figured out hardware and software at scale, the inflection points that helped them break through, and where they're headed next. So let's dive in. Hi, Noah. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Sam. I'm excited to be on the show.
Yeah. Okay, so Noah, let's start at the beginning. What's your background and what first drew you into startups and eventually founding Taiv?
I've always loved startups. I've always loved this idea that if the right person takes the right concept, they can just, take it from writing on a napkin, something that, exists only in conversations, into a real company providing real value and jobs and making an impact. And so I've always loved the idea. I obviously knew nothing about it growing up, but I tried to associate myself with those circles. And so I started a charity when I was pretty young, and that was kind of my first foray into entrepreneurship. And we helped kids affected by cancer fight back. We helped about 30 kids who had a family member suffering from cancer and raised, those kids raised about $1 million. And I did that when I was 13 until I was 18. And through that journey, I met a lot of great entrepreneurs, people who supported me along the way and mentored me, who had started tech companies before and been successful with them. And sort of fell in love with that idea. And I loved the idea of building something in the marketing space as well, for a lot of the same reasons. Just this concept that if you build a better megaphone, you can change the way people interact with other people at scale has always been really fascinating to me. And thinking about how people interact and how to scale those interactions and how can a brand reach millions of consumers all at once and still have a relatable, personable experience is something that I've always found really interesting. And so I went into school for marketing and then ended up working in the field. I dropped out of school and ran a marketing team. And then I went back to school for computer science and dropped out when we got into Y Combinator. And then I did eventually finish my degree and specialized in AI. So I kind of dropped out twice, graduated once. And it feels like a lot of my life kind of led me to that intersection of marketing and AI.
Very cool. Okay, so from your perspective, what problem were you and your co-founder trying to solve when you started?
Yeah, there's a few ways to look at it, but we've just felt like the TVs and businesses were underutilized. And, if you're sitting in a bar or restaurant, you're watching a sports game, it cuts to commercial break, you're going to see whatever network ads you would see anywhere else. And that just seemed wrong, right? When you're a bar or restaurant, you're spending meaningful amount of money to get everybody in the door. You're paying attention to every single detail of the environment, from the music to the menu to the ambience to the TVs and the content they're showing. Everything is curated to give you that exact experience that the concept wants to give you. And then 25% of the time, these TVs are showing just completely unpredictable, uncontrollable ads. And we saw that, and it felt like the only place within those four walls where they didn't have control. And also felt like a huge opportunity where the right brand or advertiser could pay a lot of money to put their brand on those screens, when people are out there having fun watching sports games. So that was sort of like the founding idea, was how do we make these screens more valuable? And sort of this idea that there's the opportunity to build a second generation ad network for these out-of-home TVs, where first generation networks were about just sending the same message to everybody with no real measurement and no real targeting. I think a newspaper or a radio ad. Second generation took that same thing and made it targeted and measurable, going from radio to podcast advertising, going from newspaper to online digital search ads, where people are still looking for the same thing, but now it's a lot more measurable, targeted, and a lot more effective. We thought we could do the same thing for TVs and businesses.
So what was the light bulb moment that led you to this idea?
Yeah, I was sitting in a bar with my now wife, at the time girlfriend, and we were watching a hockey game because I'm Canadian and that's all we do up here. And it cut to commercial break and I saw them advertising a national restaurant chain. And they were showing that beer was cheaper at this national chain than the one we were sitting in. Just saw that and thought, wow, this really hurts the experience. And I bet if they instead advertised a premium drink or an event, they would be able to get people to actually purchase that item. And instead, they're showing them that they could get a better deal at their competitor.
Yeah, that's rough.
Yeah.
Probably not the best thing to show at a bar where you're drinking. Okay, so YC is a tough filter. As you know, you've been through it. What was the YC experience like for Tave, and how did it shape the company's early trajectory?
It was a great experience. It shaped me a lot as a person and my co-founders as well. We grew up outside of a major startup ecosystem, which I think is actually pretty uncommon through YC founders. We didn't grow up in San Francisco or New York. We grew up in Winnipeg, Canada, which is still where we're based. And so there's only a handful of startups in the city. There's no real startup culture. There, at the time, wasn't a single VC fund in the city. And so we didn't really know what the best in class looked like. We knew what the best in the city looked like, but we didn't know what best in the world looked like. And being able to surround ourselves with people operating at the highest level, people who've done it before, talking to VC funds who invest at the highest level, it set a really high bar for what excellence looks like. And it really set our own perspectives of how we need to act if we want to meet that bar.
Nice. Okay. So in early updates, you wrote about Tave ramping up venue growth. What did you learn about getting venues on board at scale?
Yeah, it's interesting. So when we started signing up restaurants and bars, we would go, literally me and my co-founder would go door to door and we'd knock on the door and say, hey, we have this new startup idea. Do you want to install this on your TVs? We think we can promote your drink specials events. We think we can lift your sales. We'll pay you some of the ad revenue. We'll give you control. And that pitch hasn't really changed. It hasn't really changed fundamentally. It's the way that we distribute it that has really changed. The distribution channels change meaningfully as you scale. And you also have to rely a lot less on founder heroics. So in the early days, you don't need to define, rigid processes and scripts and CRMs, and you can just let people do things that most people wouldn't be able to do and definitely don't scale. But now that we have 10 salespeople and we're looking to hire another 8 more, suddenly it's about standardizing. How do we make it so that every person can perform, beat quota, get there as quickly as possible, make it as easy as possible for them to deliver on that value? And so you build a lot of systems, you build a lot of processes, and you come up with new sales channels, whether it's, digital marketing or advertising or cold email or cold call or trade shows, whatever it is for your business. But those channels that don't scale are the right way to start your company. And at some point, they don't scale.
You said that you're looking to hire another 8 salespeople?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. We're just in a phase of rapid growth. So we doubled our team in Q1 of this year, or the first half of this year. We went from 30 to 60 people. And now we're hiring another 20 or so roles in the next 4 months. And so we're just continuing to really quickly grow, which is a cool spot to be in. And I feel very fortunate, but we're now at a spot where we do have that product market fit and customers want our product. And it's about how do we scale it up as quickly as possible and improve the product and improve our distribution. But you sort of reach this tipping point where instead of trying to figure out what people want and convince them to take it, it's about how do you keep up with the demand. And so it's cool to be on that side of it.
Very cool. Well, congratulations are in order.
Oh,
That's
thanks.
awesome. Okay, so hardware and software is notoriously tricky. How did you build a repeatable installation process? And how did you lower churn?
Yeah, those are 2 interesting questions that I think are completely, in our case, unrelated. Installation and onboarding has always been one of the biggest challenges with our business, especially in the early days when our hardware wasn't as reliable and it needed, somewhat regular services. It had performance issues. We'd have to go there and see it in person. I think one of the common faults people make is that they try and optimize too early. And so it was actually pretty far along when we started thinking about how to scale our hardware and installation and maintenance processes. That was actually on YC's advice was, let's just get some customers. You can have 50 or 100 customers and just hire 1 or 2 people who go and do the installations and maintain them. And it doesn't need to be the most scalable system. It just needs to work for those first 50 to 100. And so that's what we did in the early days. And we would come up with, little stupid hacky ways to make sure that if there were ever issues, we were alerted and we could fix them. I remember one was that we actually made these big red buttons. I wish I had one to show you, but we 3D printed these buttons and they looked like those Staples easy buttons that you'd hit. And we would give these to every bar and we'd say put this behind your bar top. And if anything's ever wrong on your TV, hit the button. And they would. And the button was connected to Wi-Fi and it would send a signal if the box was online to disable it. It would also text me and my co-founders and then post that text in a Slack channel. And we would immediately send somebody to investigate and fix it. And we had hundreds of customers using these. It wasn't like we only did this for a couple. We had probably 250 customers and this was how they communicated issues to us was they would just hit this button that we installed.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and it worked. And that we didn't have to worry about scaling up that maintenance until until we were talking about, okay, we want to be in 10, 20, 30, 50 cities. Like now we need it to be scalable, but that was actually quite a bit away. That was almost when we started talking about a Series A, probably 6 to 12 months before we raised it was when we actually solved that problem. And it became a lot easier to solve when we were at that stage because we knew what our issues were. We knew how to solve it. We had more resources to do it. We knew that if we had Wi-Fi issues, we could hire an RF lab and do better antenna design to fix it. We knew that we could build an app to make it easy for people to install that helps you pair the devices to Wi-Fi from your phone. Like by going through hundreds of cycles and iteratively improving the product, like we had a really good idea of what a scalable system would look like. And so it made it a lot easier.
So are those buttons, are they still in use anywhere?
As far as I know, we've pulled them all out of production.
Okay.
There's still some bars that have them, but we at some point moved that functionality to our software. So we still have on our software a disable button that you can hit. And it does the same thing in Texas, and it doesn't get hit very often, fortunately, anymore. But in the early days, people were using our software because it was bartenders who'd experienced the problem. And so we had to kind of solve for how does a bartender want to interact with this product? Because we don't have, like most tech companies, it's not like people are logging into our platform to use it. It's running on the TVs in the background. And so we said, what's the lowest friction way for somebody to interact with your TV? And we figured either a remote or a button. But as we've scaled, it's kind of moved upstream where now it's mostly somebody at a head office that's interacting. And so they are doing it on a computer.
That's pretty cool.
Thanks.
I would never have thought to put that was easy buttons in a bar, but it makes sense. Like the people using it are gonna want something very to just be like, okay, it's not working, bang it, and then
Yeah, it was all about just doing things that don't scale and figuring out how to solve a problem without how do you solve a problem quickly, even if it's not doing it properly? Because to properly fix this would have taken millions of dollars and months of engineering work. And so the problem became, how do we not fix it, but take away the user pain? And this was the answer. It's funny. It introduced its own set of challenges where people saw the buttons and thought they looked fun. And so people would start hitting the buttons when there wasn't a problem, but it was a better problem to have.
That is funny. Okay, wait. So people would hit them when they weren't supposed to?
Yeah. So they'd hire a new bartender and the bartender would see this big red button and just hit it for fun, or a customer would lean over the bar and hit the button because they looked really they looked fun and nothing would happen. Oh, that's weird. And then we'd get a text and we'd phone them and be like, hey, what's wrong with your TVs? And they'd be like, oh, what? What are you guys talking about? So we had to get smaller. We used to call them the big red button, and we had to change to the small blue button because the big red button was just too tempting.
You did too good of a job. You did it too well. That's hilarious. Okay. So you said that churn is a completely different factor, completely different as far as the way you approached it with processes. So in gyms, bars, restaurants, what is the retention story? How do you keep venues happy? How did you stop them from churning? Especially if there was multiple repeated uses of this button. How did you help that?
Yeah, we've really high retention today. We have about 99% monthly retention. It's gone up over time, but I think the keys to retention are having a good enough product that people are willing to tolerate inconveniences. So I think it's unrealistic to assume that your product's going to be perfect from day one. And the trick is to provide enough value that people are willing to deal with the occasional issue or the occasional suboptimal UX or whatever it is, because the value when it's working is so high that it's still better than the next best alternative. I think that's one of the keys. And the second one is just providing really good customer service. We've always really prioritized that, where for years it was the founders providing service. Whenever there was any issue, day or night, if someone would hit one of those buttons, if they text us or call us, they'd get a call back within minutes. And we would push to if we got a bug report, and we still do this, if we get a bug report, we try and get a fix out the same day, whenever possible. And live to production, push to every customer that we have.
Wow.
Whenever possible. And if not same day, within a couple of days. We don't, a lot of companies lean behind the excuse of, oh, it'll go on the roadmap and we'll fix it. And we just don't let ourselves use that as an out. We evaluate it. And if it's not a large undertaking to fix, then we push it out right away. And if it is a large undertaking, we try and figure out a workaround. So I think having that quality of support where people know that they can rely on your team, they trust your team, they feel comfortable reaching out, they have good communication channels with them. People are willing to give you a lot more grace than if they see you as a soulless giant company that doesn't care about them.
That makes sense, which is, I guess, why it helps to do things that aren't scalable in the beginning so that they know your faces.
Yeah, it's funny because the non-scalable things actually some of them end up scaling. I'm not doing the support anyway anymore today, but we have a an account management and support team who does the exact same thing that we would do back in the day. And it's all personalized and they all know who they are. Like every restaurant knows who their account managers are and they know they can text them at any time and get a response. We took those same things that people really valued and, we just scaled the unscalable by hiring more people to do the same thing and incorporating some technology and AI and automations. But largely just scaling what people actually liked. It's all just about friction, right? Provide a product that creates no new work and provides a lot of value. Like they're happy to do it.
Obviously, we're early investors in your company, which is why you're on this show. In the updates that we got in 2023 to 2024, it looked like there was a turning point, that there was significant scaling in partners, in churn, in everything. What clicked?
Network effects just came into play that were so incredibly powerful. That is, I think, the biggest defining moment in our company. And so we've always talked about how we have two sides. Like we're basically a marketplace where we sell the supply side, the restaurants and bars, and we say, hey, can we install this technology? And we have a demand side, which is advertisers. And we say, do you want to buy ads on those bars? And we've kind of had to scale those two up together because of the chicken and egg problems. Go get our first 10 bars, literally walk across the street to the advertiser who has like a mechanic shop and say, hey, do you want to like buy ads on those 10 bars? And do you want to spend a couple $100 a month and advertise there, right? And then now that we have a mechanic, we go to other bars and have a mechanic and say, hey, he's advertising. If you sign up, we can guarantee you some revenue. And then we get the next 10 bars and then we go to a slightly bigger advertiser. And there's always been these like step functions where we work up to bigger restaurant groups, but also bigger advertisers. And we hit our first real step where we went from small independent advertisers to like regional buys from notable brands. And so we started working with brands, that are household names like Pepsi and Coke and BMW and Bacardi. And we had enough scale. We had at the time like a couple hundred locations that they were interested at least in doing small buys with us. And that hit a step. And then we were able to go to more restaurants and say, look at all these advertisers we're working with, launch more cities, launch more markets, launched with bigger groups. And we went back to advertisers and suddenly we had a much bigger network. And now with almost 3,000 venues, we're still not at the highest step, but we're doing some pretty sizable deals with notable brands. And that was completely transformative. And I think we were fortunate that because we were first to market in this space, people were willing to do buys a lot earlier than they otherwise would have on the ad side. Because if somebody were to try and enter this space today, they would face a much stronger chicken and egg problem because they could go buy ads from us at scale. And so it's harder to convince them to buy ads from someone else without that scale. And that's sort of the value of building those network effects.
What's been the proudest this is working moment so far? Because you mentioned working with these big name brands. So was that one of them or was it even earlier?
That was one of them. I still get so excited whenever like a friend or an investor or just anybody sends me a text and it's like, hey, I just walked in and I saw your product. It's really cool. And sends me a picture. And like we get those pretty regularly. And it's just so cool to see, especially because we didn't launch in the city I live in until June of this year. So until about 3 months ago. Well, I would never see the product, but I just get these texts like once every week or two being like, hey, like just saw your product. It looks good. It was awesome. And then just hearing like customer love. Like I love when we get, a customer who loves the product or raves about getting really good support from one of our people or just loves the idea or makes a referral. Like every time that happens, it just makes me so happy.
Is it hard to manage the business from a completely different country?
I mean, I spent a lot of time down in the US for that reason. So most of our team is here in Canada. We have about 80% of our team is based in Winnipeg in person and only 20% is remote in the US, mostly in our major markets. But when we were getting started, I was in the US, and so were my co-founders. Like we went through YC in person in San Francisco, came back here during COVID, and then we launched in April of 21. And the three of us moved down to Miami for 6 months to launch the business. And then when we launched Tampa as a second market, the three of us moved to Tampa for 3 months. And then we did Austin. It wasn't until our fourth market that we started leaning into doing them remotely. And even then we would go visit all the time. We still go visit all the time because you need to have that close relationship with your customers.
What's been the hardest or most underestimated part of building Taiv?
The logistics have been so difficult with this business. And it's something we never realized was going to be so hard. You kind of leaned into it a little bit earlier, but like ordering supply from suppliers, assembling hardware, like securely flashing on our firmware and software, getting everything deployed, making sure it's remote updatable, making sure that it's running smoothly, and then all the supporting infrastructure to power that has just been so much bigger of a project than we initially anticipated. Like there's so much that goes on behind the scenes for us to be able to remotely monitor every device, make sure ads are delivering properly, make sure that we can fix issues if there are issues, have the like systems in place to send out technicians if we need to, or send out messages to people about their products if they need to. It's just all the internal systems that we've had to build, and the technology around it has been pretty immense. Even our own like ad servers and content management systems and digital signage software that just you wouldn't expect us to have had to build, but because our product's so unique, we've kind of had to build almost everything from the ground up.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds like a lot. So, congratulations on your Series A. You have IDC Ventures leading. What was that process like from the inside?
Yeah, it's funny. It was really hard to raise a Series A until the day that it wasn't. Yeah, so we tried to raise our Series A, at least at the beginning, before we hit that real traction inflection point, and we got a lot of no's, like hundreds of no's. And they were right to say no. We weren't at the stage where we should have been raising a Series A. And we went back to market and we focused on getting more traction and really refining the product. And then when we went to market the second time, it was a completely different story. We had multiple term sheets. Everybody was interested. We would have had more, but we got decided to sign one of the term sheets like early because it was going to expire. And so suddenly it went from nobody wants to invest to like we had way more capital offered than we could take on. And even as like follow-on investors, we had almost every existing investor on our cap table put in more money at Series A. And most of them didn't get to put in the allocation that they wanted. And it was really cool. And so from the inside, it was very stressful and it was a very long process and a lot of learning and self-reflection about what it really means to be at that traction standpoint where you're ready to raise a larger institutional like Series A round, but a lot of learning that I think will apply to future raises as well.
So, once you had more traction, how did that change investor conversations compared to earlier rounds?
It changed the framing primarily around valuation and round size. So like we always had growth numbers and retention metrics and a interesting enough product and good customers and stuff that people wanted to invest. The problem was that people didn't want to invest at a Series A valuation. They wanted to invest at a seed valuation. And we didn't want to raise a seed round at that stage. So I think we just had unrealistic expectations initially about where the market was at. But going through that process gave us a lot of clarity. And we actually went back to a lot of the same investors and pitched them again and developed some relationships over time. IDC and Emerging, the two biggest funds, met both of them in January of last year of 24. And we didn't sign a term sheet with them until I believe it was May or June. And it wasn't that it took 6 months to go through a fundraising process, that we weren't ready because we knew what traction metrics we would have to be at in order to raise the kind of round we wanted to raise. And so we told both of them that we weren't raising yet, but we would keep them updated. And then when we were ready to raise, things moved pretty quickly.
It's very cool. Okay. So for other founders listening, what advice would you give them about raising when you have momentum, but also keeping your options open?
Yeah, it's hard. I would say figure out what you want to raise from a dollar perspective. We've had some great investors, some great brand name investors, but I wouldn't prioritize that over just raising the amount of capital you need and doing it quickly at a fair price. I wouldn't try and over optimize the system. I would just try and get money in the door quickly from, good to great people and then get back to work. Do enough market research to know what you can realistically raise and at what price, because otherwise you're going to waste a lot of time. And go and just try and raise a round that isn't pushing the envelope in terms of valuation, but is also very fair. And then it usually comes together pretty quickly.
Where do you see Taiv 3 to 5 years from now? What's the bigger vision beyond bars and gyms?
I think what we're building, bigger picture, is infrastructure for the entertainment systems and businesses. So it's not just about the TVs and it's not just about bars. It's about how they power that guest experience. Everything from TVs that show maybe it's menus or digital signage or live cable, all the way to of their audio systems and the way they interact with their guests while they're in store using technology. And it's not just about restaurants and bars, it's about all the different business types where people sit there and there's a captive audience, and we can turn that into a more valuable asset for the business. And then at the same time, we kind of see ourselves building this really cool second generation ad network where you can target ads based on exactly the types of people that are there and exactly the content that they're showing. And then you can run them in a really high performance medium, but you can actually measure how well those ads perform, kind of building a performance marketing model in a space where that's never existed before. And I think being able to do that just completely flips the script from, okay, we're doing awareness ads and buying Taiv instead of billboards to, oh, this is like buying a Facebook ad, but for a CPG brand that's sold in a retail environment. We can actually measure it the same way. I think that's really powerful.
Do you think that privacy is becoming a luxury in ad tech? How does Taiv balance advertiser demands with consumer trust?
Yeah, I love that question. I think that privacy is really important. And I also think that some people don't understand how different ad networks are using their data and where that line actually is for privacy. And so we've always taken a very clear stance that we only use aggregated anonymized data. But we do use data, but you can never tie it back to the individual person. And I think that actually protects people's privacy. Like, I don't think that knowing the demographic that goes to a certain bar, knowing that it's mostly 21 to 30-year-olds, knowing that somebody bought 4 shots of Jägermeister one night, I don't actually think that is a privacy issue because they can't identify it back to you. We're just using it in aggregate and anonymized. Where I think it gets really sketchy is when you try and de-anonymize that data. So if I'm trying to actually tie it to the specific person, that's where I think privacy comes into play. And I think people have the right to have their own data remain their own, where you can't tie somebody's purchase records back to them. But I don't think that's different. I think that is fundamentally different than a bar using the data of all the people who go there in order to better target their offering.
Cool. I like that. What excites you the most about where Taiv is headed?
I just see such a greenfield opportunity. Like, we are building something that has never existed before in a massive space, and customers really like it. And that's cool. Like, it's cool to see that we're only getting a tiny fraction of a percent of the market share here. And like, I genuinely think this is one of the biggest spaces that could exist. We're building, a second generation ad network for TV that's billions, if not trillions of annual revenue could come from that space. And being able to be first to market and being able to forge our own path and come up with our own solutions and really define how things should work in the space has been really fun and really interesting.
Yeah, that is really exciting. Being a first mover in this market is kind of insane.
Yeah, it's been really cool, and lots of like unexpected challenges too. Like, when we're talking about like targeting data, we have to build our own taxonomies of how you target data because it doesn't exist. It's not that we can just look and say, oh, how do people buy ads on Facebook? Let's copy their taxonomy, because you could do that if you're doing a digital platform, and we could do that if we're doing an in-home streaming service, but in business, it's completely different. And so it's a lot of like first principles thinking about how should this work? And, if we're to go and build this first, second generation ad network for this specific use case, how should it be bought? And we've come up with some really cool implementations that I think work great.
Okay, I have a couple of quick questions for you, and I'm just going to fire them off. And I want you to keep them to like 1 minute or less. You ready? What is one piece of advice you'd give yourself before YC?
I would really encourage myself to launch quickly, launch fast, and don't be afraid to iterate.
What's your favorite memory from the early scrappy days of Taiv?
My favorite memory is that we had our very first customer, and we had like a compatibility issue where we would sometimes turn their screens green, which is like a huge problem and not something we do anymore, obviously. But we'd sometimes turn their screens green, and we had no monitoring and repair infrastructure. And so with their permission, we set up one of those like online security cameras, and we set it up on it was a car dealership on a salesperson's desk pointed directly at the TV. And then we would just like have that open in the background. And like whenever it went green, somebody would just jump in their car and drive down. And that's how we fixed it. And then we eventually came up with like a smart adapter that we would plug into, and then we could toggle the power cycle remotely. And then we wouldn't need to drive there anymore. And we actually trained an AI model to recognize when the TV went green and then automatically trigger that. And that was like how we solved problems for like a while before we actually got to the root of the issue.
That's incredible. Okay, what's one thing you wish you knew earlier?
I wish that I went faster earlier. Like, I think that not the very early days, we went about as fast as we could, but then there was a moment in the middle where we had a pretty good but not amazing product where I think we didn't go at full speed and we didn't raise as much money as we probably should have because we wanted to get our product better. And I think that good is the enemy of great, and we should have just taken all the resources we could in order to move as fast as we could and grow and figure it out as we went. And that's kind of the approach we've taken in the last couple of years. And it's really been transformative.
What's a book, a podcast, or a habit that's had a really big impact on you recently?
Yeah. So podcast, I always loved Masters of Scale by Reid Hoffman. I used to listen to that every morning. I'd go for a run and I'd listen to an episode. We were going through YC. I'd run through Mountain View and listen to him interview someone for 45 minutes. And that was through YC. And I still like that podcast. The Hard Thing About Hard Things is my favorite book, at least related to startups. And habit, just prioritizing physical activity and health. It's so good to take your mind off things for an hour. And a lot of the time, that's actually when you do your best thinking, is when you take a step back.
What's one thing you wish more people knew about in-venue media?
I wish more people were willing to give it a try. And I think a lot of people bucket it into a traditional like billboard or awareness advertising bucket and are hesitant to try it. Uh, and then once they do, they typically get great results. And so, especially for the right types of brands. And I'm not saying that super early stage companies should do this. They shouldn't. They should do unscalable like customer acquisition. But once you have a channel that's working and you're starting to reach the ceiling of what you can attract with that channel, this can be a really great targeted, performative, and measurable channel for a lot of brands.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where can people follow you and Tave?
Yeah, the best place to follow me is on my LinkedIn, and Tave as well. Like we do post on Instagram as well, but follow me on LinkedIn, and I pretty regularly post updates about everything that's going on. And I also just try to post some interesting thought leadership when I can about things that are going on and things we've learned along the way.
Okay, cool. Well, that's it for today.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. A huge thank you to Noah for joining us and sharing the story behind Tave. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to follow 8 Spotlight wherever you get your podcasts, and stay tuned as we continue to share the journeys of some of the most exciting founders and companies from the Y Combinator community and our portfolio. I'm Samantha, and thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.